I'm live. I've just been interrupted, but I've only read about 2 minutes, I think. I was explaining I'm reading out of As Moses Was Born. It is the story of Moses, but the time before he was found in the bulrushes. She, Joan Grant, is a writer of her far memories. This is her 7th book, which is describing one of her lives in the past. This plays in old Egypt, and she believes that the baby Moses might have been the son of Ramoses II. And the story is told through the words of his reclusive half-brother Nebunefer. So, I was just starting the 8th reading, I believe, The Well of the Three Sycamores. Morning light poured across the cultivation, making a patch of cabbages green as malachite and gliding ripening wheat into a collar of gold for the well of the three sycamores. I was thirsty and began to regret that I had chosen the meeting place because the well was dry and so would be unfrequented. I knew it was dry, for Samson had been here with Ramoses only a few days earlier. When he had noticed that one of his dogs was panting excessively, he had tied his chariot horses to a tree and gone in search of water. She had watched him bring up an empty bucket from the well, then stride off along the path to Hatshepsut's mortuary temple. Hatshepsut's mortuary temple. He had returned carrying a pitcher which he had filled from the pool in the prince's court, and only when his dog was comfortable did he suddenly become angry that no one had recognized him. Samson held the dog in her arms while he drove at full gallop to the house of the overseer of the temple tribute, and ordered him to supply the village with water until such time as his servants or the prayers of the priests had effectively replenished the well. The shadow of the sycamores drew slowly nearer as I sat on the wellhead. Time passed so slowly that Ra seemed to drive the sun at the pace of a scarab beetle rolling a ball of dung. I began to torture myself with anxiety. Had the high courage of Ramoses failed to withstand the dark? Had he called out to Sen, and hearing only the drumming of lonely blood in his ears, fled in panic and slipped from the narrow bridge over the pit? What bitter irony if Seti's favourite son had fallen into the trap designed for tomb robbers. My capacity for imagining disaster now used the merciless flail. I could see Ramoses returning from Thebes, embittered because he thought even his brother had found it amusing to deceive his courage. I could see him with a broken spine, unable to make himself heard even when the stoneworkers passed above him, because his mouth was so dry from calling to a father who seemed indifferent to the pleas of a crippled boy. When I saw him coming towards me along the narrow path, I concealed myself behind one of the trees so that I could snatch a moment in which to seek composure. It was not an old tree, so he knew a man stood there, though my face was hidden. "Are you waiting for me?" he asked. I turned towards him. "It is really you, Neb," he said slowly. "Oh, Neb, you're safe." He flung his arms around me, and we hugged each other as we had done only once before when he was a little boy sobbing in a hayloft because Tua had made him kill his little kitten that had scratched her. His fingers clutched my shoulder blades. "Neb, you are solid. I know Father would be disappointed because it matters so much that I can feel you. But it's difficult for me not to be afraid when someone hasn't a body you can touch." He hugged me again. "Ah, Neb, there's so much to tell you. Do you know where I have been all night? You will never be able to guess so I had better say it at once. Neb, I went to the tomb, and Father was there. We talked to each other much more easily than we have ever done before, and I know it was only a dream, his talking to me, I mean, because I knew how difficult it is for me to believe in real things. I asked him for a sign, and he said I would find it here, and a sign is you. You went to Father's tomb alone? I did, Neb. I promise you I did. Then you have more courage than your elder brother, I said, hoping that my voice sounded as though I gave the rather grudging praise, which is always the most convincing to those who are too humble to realize that praise is their right. When I tell you everything, you'll understand why I had to go there. It is not brave to do something when everything else is even more frightening. I'm not really brave, Neb. I just chose the smallest fear. When a boy of 13 insists on driving the most unruly pair of stallions in the royal stables and kills 3 lions on his first lion hunt, he's unlikely to lack courage. But Neb, surely you understand. That is one of the 1,000 reasons why you are the person I measure myself by. When everyone else was saying how brave I was, you only smiled and refused to come to the banquet Mother had given my honor. You knew, though, she didn't. You knew, though, she didn't, that I chose the new stallion to prove that my groom, the man with one leg I brought back with me after my first season at the house of the captains, was more skilled with horses than any of the others whose fathers and grandfathers had been trained in the royal stables. I, too, have driven stallions that were not yet familiar with harnesses, but I have never killed 3 lions in one afternoon. I only killed 3 because I was so terrified of killing one. I thought that when I had killed a wild lion, even though it had to be killed because it was old and ate villagers when it was hungry, my own lion would know and turn against me. And I was also very frightened of being clawed. Don't you remember the man whose face was ripped open? Father had driven his spear deep onto the lion's side, but when the man ran up to proclaim it dead to the royal spear, it suddenly stood up and slashed its paw like a flail across his face. I was only 11 then, and everyone believed that I suddenly ran into a patch of reeds because I wanted to squat. Even Father was amused, for he thought it would teach me not to eat too many honey cakes. I vomited because seeing the man's eyes slowly sliding down his cheek was choking me, as though it were a huge lump of phlegm in my throat. So I had to kill 3 lions to prove to myself that I wasn't afraid of thinking that I could not even play with a lion cub now that I knew I had been an enemy of its kindred. There's a certain skill required before anyone can kill a lion with a spear thrown from a chariot moving fast over stony ground. Skill, said Ramosis a little scornfully. Anyone can teach his body to be obedient if the fear of being betrayed by it is worse than having to punish it. To show that he was not boasting, he held out his right arm. Dried blood was dark as onyx in the deep pits his teeth had scored in the muscle. My body is horribly disobedient, so I have to treat it as though it were a foreigner who refuses to realize he is fortunate to be allowed to pay tribute to Egypt. I had to bite my arm because it wouldn't hold the lamp steady when Father told me I didn't need a light to see him by. He looked at his arm attentively. I didn't realize it showed so much. Usually, when I have to punish myself, I can hide the mark with some stuff I stole from Tudor's toilet chest. Did you see, Father? Well, I did and I didn't. It's rather difficult to explain. But it's all true. I'm sure it is. Oh, Neb, it is so lovely being believed. I ought to have known you would, even without Father telling me you were the sign. You saw Father? I tried to conceal my eagerness. He sat on the wall of the well beside me. At first I only heard him. We talked as though we were both alive, and quite soon I wasn't even shy. Then he told me to try to be aware of him, even though I couldn't hear his voice. I remembered Sensen telling me that real and beautiful things could happen in dreams, not just nothing or nightmares, which usually happened to me. So I tried to sleep. I heard Father say, "Good night, my son," very gently, as he used to when I was so young that I was allowed to take a toy to bed. I'm not quite sure, even now, whether I was awake or asleep when I felt him take my hand. The odd thing was that though I was lying on some dusty straw, it smelled like fresh clover. I stood up and, hand in hand, we were walking through a cornfield. Tall corn with poppies and moon daisies among the stalks. Father looked younger than I've ever seen him, and he wasn't wearing a wig or his ceremonial beard. I know we talked, but it wasn't in words. At least, I can't remember any. We went to his new temple, and suddenly, instead of pillars that made everyone feel small and insignificant, there were trees soaring up with birds singing among the leaves and very green grass instead of stone under our feet. It was a dream, Neb, but it was real. Neb, are you crying? Because I am happy. Now I can go away with Sensen and not feel guilty. You are sure you want to give me Egypt? If I were Pharaoh and promised to let you marry Nefertari tomorrow, wouldn't you be sad if I changed my mind? It will be difficult to rule, Mother, without you to help me. Couldn't you stay here? Father said that I must remember that she will not dare to argue if I say, "Pharaoh has spoken." He scored a line in the white dust with the toe of his sandal, trying to find a tactful way of telling me news that he feared might hurt my pride. Mother tried to murder you and Sensen. How should I punish her? By proving to her that although she could rule her husband, she cannot rule her son. It is terrible to discover I hate her, he said slowly. It's like hearing the murmur of a crowd, but suddenly knowing what each of them is saying against you. I've always believed that she was much wiser than I am, but now I know she is only much more clever. She wanted me to be ruthless, so that I would never refuse to obey her. Oh, Neb, what shall I do? It has been said that the fowler who tries to snare a wild swan becomes entangled in his own net. She thinks I'm dead, so your enemies are already divided, because each is jealous of the other, who may claim the favor of the royal mother for having implemented her secret orders. It is our secret that she has been outwitted. And knowing how easy it was to deceive her by so simple a device as feeding rotten meat to a crocodile, you will have no reason to be awed by her subtlety. Crocodile? What crocodile? The one that was so obedient as to swallow apparent proof that Sensen and I are dead. A necklace and an armlet, garnished with putrid goat's flesh. I shall never forgive Mother. That is a remark unworthy of Pharaoh. I smiled to show him I spoke only in affection. It is your duty to honor loyalty in all the manifestations. If you pause to consider whether each individual soldier of an invading army deserves to be killed, Egypt will again be insecure. A time may come when only the horizon fence a pasture where all flocks can graze, but in our day there is need of shepherds and their dogs. You have seen your mongoose teaching her young to kill snakes. Tua gave you a similar education. Not having the wit to know what is better to wear the ureus on your forehead than to fear a cobra under your bed. You have also seen father's hunting cat kill a dog which came too near her kittens. To protect one's young is a very important instinct. Had Tua been more richly endowed with insight, she would have known that her elaborate plan for my disposal were redundant. I think she was wicked not to let me talk to you about it. Wickedness is another word for stupidity, and she at least had the courage to do what she considered best for Egypt. She has never loved anyone than herself. To show how she could believe I would not soon grow bored with Samson and return to lead a revolt against you. Mother despises people who think it is important to be lovable. She said it is a weakness, which should have been outgrown by those who are royal and Egyptian. In due course she will revise her opinion. Perhaps she is born in Babylon, a drab little girl with a squint, pounding pig fat to grease Azuma's beard. I said this with considerable feeling. Ramosa stared at me in astonishment and then laughed until he got hiccups. Think of Mother fat and young and silly. Ned, whenever I'm frightened of her, I shall try to think of her like that. And I'll tell Nefertari so we can both think of it so hard that it will probably come true. One must not underrate women. I broke off, dismayed that I had used the same phrase when I was speaking as Seti. He smiled. That is just what Father said, and now that you have reminded me, I shall never forget it. You don't believe all women are dangerous? No, of course you don't. Or you wouldn't love Samson. He slid down from the wall and sat cross-legged, looking up at me. Neb, I shall never be the person I want to be until a woman really loves me. I'm going to tell you my most secret. I wish I had been born a woman, because the two people in history I admire most are Hatshepsut and the Heretics Queen. Now that I'm Pharaoh, I shall refuse to say the Heretics Queen when I mean Nefertiti. It is sillier than calling the Hyksos the people whose name shall never be spoken. That Ramosis feared women was natural to the son of Tua, but that he would have liked to be female I found startling. Why did you choose Hatshepsut? Because she was betrayed by both her husbands, yet neither of the great Thothnes dared to do more than cut her name from her monuments after she was dead. She was a much greater warrior than either of them, and our captains still drink a toast to her before battle. She lives in the hearts of both men and women. Didn't you know that every woman thanks Hatshepsut whenever she colors her nails or her hair with the henna that the warrior queen brought to Egypt? And Nefertiti? He looked embarrassed. Samson had a dream. It was when we were sailing together, and she went to sleep while we were becalmed. She had been talking about Nefertiti, and when Samson woke up, she said there was something very important she had to tell me about the people whose name shall never be spoken. I've always wondered about them, ever since my nurse used to threaten that they would kill me in my bed if I was disobedient. So I listened very carefully. He hesitated. Samson and I wasn't to tell anyone because they would only laugh at me. Samson knows that I never laugh at her dreams. He nodded. She told me that too. Well, first, she said that Nefertiti could have ruled instead of her husband, and ruled much better than he did, if she had told anyone important, that he hadn't really invented a new religion, but only adapted a hearsay that came originally from Samaria. As the Sumerians have always been a tiresome, warlike nation, I failed to see how they caused Akhenaten to carry pacifism to the point of idiocy. I know it sounds unlikely, I said anxiously, but if you had been with us and heard her talking while the dream was fresh, I'm sure you would have believed her. Even the history scribes don't know who the Hyksos really were, except that twice they conquered Egypt for more than 200 years, because all the records of our shame have been erased from the monuments. Census says that the Hyksos were the northern princes, who are still only prosperous shepherds, though they pretend to be kings, and that they invaded us when Egypt had already been conquered. Conquered by whom? By an idea, a Hebrew idea. Until they thought of it, Hebrews were ordinary Sumerians. But this idea was so wicked that they were exiled, even from Babylon. The idea is about an imaginary god called Yahweh. He must be imaginary, for they don't make statues of him, because no one knows what he looks like. People who believe in Yahweh think it is wrong to kill other people, even in war. So they have no temples and no army. They told our people about their idea, in secret of course, and everyone loved having a secret to tell. The idea spread and spread throughout Egypt, until the weaklings and the fools who believed in it began to think that Yahweh was a better god even than Horus. It was easy for the weaklings to believe, because the ones who were cowards would refuse to fight without admitting even to themselves that they were cowardly. And those who were mean and greedy could refuse to pay temple tribute. The idea was like a terrible pestilence. First the army revolted, and then everyone ceased to respect even the priesthood. When they saw that they could keep everything for themselves without suffering the wrath of the gods, why did not our priests challenge theirs to a magical battle? They have no priests now. Think what would happen to a country without a priesthood. He hesitated. I know some of the Amen priests are corrupt, but I suppose even Mentu is better than nothing. Hebrews think that everyone, at least every man, I'm not sure about women, should obey only Yahweh and allow no one else to direct his conscience. What arrogance! Each of them pretending that they are an intermediary of the will of their God, each of them pretending that he is as good as or better than a pharaoh. He was so hotly indignant that this last hearsay that my lips twitched, though fortunately he did not notice. And you think this idea of the Hebrews has already on 2 occasions caused Egypt to be overrun by foreign shepherds? How else could Egypt have been conquered? We have the best soldiers, the best chariots, the best ships, and the best kings. Now you are laughing at me, Neb, he said reproachfully. It makes sense, really it does, if only you will believe that the people whose name shall never be spoken were nothing more than an idea in some Hebrews. Akhenaten's vizier was born a Hebrew. Everyone knows that. But what they don't know is that it was the vizier who persuaded Pharaoh to let the northern garrisons starve so that Egyptian soldiers wouldn't be able to kill anyone. The new religion worshipped Ra in the form of the Aten, I said mildly. You may well disagree with Akhenaten, as I do, but he was sincere in his belief that mankind should follow love rather than hatred. He didn't really love Nefertiti, even though he had horribly undignified I felt that curious sense of authority which is insistent as the rising Nile and as unconcerned with logic as the flowing of a lotus. One day, Ramoses, you will find love. He questioned me eagerly, but I, much as I longed to tell him of the time and the place and the circumstances, could say no more. Right. Have a wonderful Tuesday.